Londra'da piyasaya ilişkin değerlendirmeleri ve yorumları almak üzere Huntek Markets piyasa analisti Richard Perry var karşımızda. Richard, good morning.
Good morning.
I would like to start with the recent weakness at US dollar. How far can it go? Because we just see that markets are priced in a little bit of Trump's ability of policy making and also some weak US data as well. But when we look at Friday's strong NFP numbers at United States, the effect of that has been vanished right now. How far can the dollar's weakness go?
Well, I think that Friday's rebound that we saw on the dollar is going to be short-lived because I don't really see that it was driven by the average hourly earnings growth, which is basically what the market is really looking for. It saw the headline payrolls number coming in ahead of expectations. That drove the dollar higher, but I think it was just a move that ultimately will probably be sold into because inflation is the big factor that the Fed are looking out for now. We saw last night from a speech from the FOMC member Bullard that was suggesting that perhaps inflation could, on a PCE basis, not even reach the 2% level, even if the unemployment level went back to 3%. So that suggests that there is still an inherent underlying inflation that is really quite weak in the States, and that will prevent the US from hiking interest rates too quickly. I think that sort of will question, obviously, December and sort of pushes out expectations of a rate hike. So I think that the dollar is still under pressure, and we see that the net futures are now going negative. The market is now net short on the dollar. So I think that there is still some underlying sort of weakness that we're going to see in the dollar.
And we will see U.S. inflation numbers this week. What do you expect in terms of that? Because we just see Fed is moving towards a model which contains Phillips curve. And do you believe that is going to be the major case in the near future if we just see some weak inflation numbers as well? Because the markets are a little bit questioning about that model, if it works or not.
That is true, yes. I think the Phillips curve is increasingly sort of a topic of conversation that the markets are really discussing as to whether the Phillips curve is actually still appropriate for the US, because obviously we've had inflation falling away throughout 2017 on a CPI basis and also the PCE basis, and we are questioning whether actually we're going to see these average wage growth coming through now. So I think the market is still probably with some slack in the labour force in the States, because we still see unemployment falling away. Jobs growth is still over 200,000, but yet average hourly earnings are still not picking up. Inflation is subdued in the States, and I think that is a real issue that the Fed is now going to have to question whether the Phillips curve is still appropriate and whether it will actually kick in eventually.
And when we look at euro strength, what can you say about that? Because we just see some strong data on the European side. When we look at core inflation, it's accelerating. And when we look at the growth numbers, they are doing fine. Do you believe that is going to be a major triggering point for ECB on tapering? Where do you expect to see the announcement, and how further can it carry euro forward?
Well, I think obviously the euro has been strengthening throughout the last few months, really, on the back of the fact that the eurozone economy is generating moves towards growth now. You're seeing it in the PMI numbers. Although last month's PMIs just came off a little bit, I think you're still seeing some strength going forward, and I think the market is still factoring in the fact that the ECB is moving towards this tapering now. So I think that is going to continue to underpin the euro, especially against the dollar, because obviously we're obviously factoring in the fact that the Fed may be pushing back on its heightening expectations, and I think that's going to continue to sort of pull euro dollar higher. You look at the charts; they continue to remain strongly trending higher. You saw the euro dollar finding support above that key breakout of 117.10 that we saw, which was the August 2015 high. And that basically, the breakout above the August 2015 high opens up 120 big figure, and there's no real reason why we can't see that in the next few months, I think.
And the last question is about the equity markets. When we look at U.S. equities, Dow Jones is breaking records for 9th day in a row. And when we look at European equities, we just see some effects of strong euro, and it seems a little bit in a correction mode. Do you believe that is going to be some divergence between U.S. stocks and also European stocks?
Yeah, I think it's a divergence that's going to continue, because what we have seen is strong US earnings growth, strong US earnings season, and performing better than the European earnings season, certainly on a company basis. And what we have seen is the strength of the euro, which is hitting the European earnings. You're seeing it coming out in the forward statements as well, that especially for the exporters, and that is certainly hitting the DAX. DAX is a big index which has been sort of 5% off its highs, whereas obviously the US markets are at their all-time highs. So that underperformance is a real issue, I think, going forward. And if the euro continues to strengthen, I think the European equity markets are going to continue to struggle, and certainly the DAX and the CAC are two of those such markets.
Richard Perry, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Evet, Richard Perry'nin görüşleri böyleydi.